There are a lot of Jeremy Corbyn supporters. Stick with me and I'll explain to you the very reason why Jeremy Corbyn would be a disaster to the British economy and why you should never vote Labour if you're thinking of having him as your Prime Minister. Great Britain is already in a financial mess enough as it is. They're sitting at £8.6 trillion in debt, and of course there is an £18 billion budget deficit. That was reduced from about £190 billion, so there has been progress over the past 8 years. It's really all down to the creditors, because the creditors hold the purse strings. It's not the government that holds the purse strings. Government has to get the money from somewhere, and there's only so much taxpayers' money that they can take, and the taxpayers' money doesn't make up enough in order to pay for his pipe dream. Now the fact of the matter is, with someone like Jeremy Corbyn, you would fully expect that he would want to increase the size of the public sector. So you have to ask this question: where is the money going to come from to pay for all of the welfare statism, for all the benefits, for all the free goodies, for the increased size of the public sector? Where does the money come from? Well, there are only two places you can get money from. The first place is through the private sector that he wishes to reduce the size of. How are you going to finance the increased size of the public sector? As Jeremy Corbyn had conceded, he had admitted himself, he wishes to run the printing press. It will lead Britain to hyperinflation. And the very reason for why that is you have to understand that it is every £1 to the value of the product. For every £1 that you print in circulation, there is a 1 plus debt added to the currency. And for every £1 printed and 1 plus debt added to the currency devalues in purchasing power. Eventually people lose faith in that currency. And when the people begin to lose faith in the currency, they drop the currency. A large quantity of that paper in circulation is dropped and is left there in circulation. It leads to a hyperinflation problem. In other words, the inflation reaches 10% and it spirals out of control to a point that the government can no longer control. Now, the real inflationary rate is already high enough as it is. It's higher than official figures. All he will do is increase the inflation. And as a result of increasing the inflation, it will greatly increase the cost of living. And you can even see that he'll cause an even greater inflationary problem through greatly increasing the tax rates in order to pay for it all. He would have to tax the private sector half to death in order to finance his increased borrowing and spending to finance an increased size of a public sector. His only option then, because he doesn't have enough money to take from the taxpayer of the private sector, is to take from that of the printing press. The public sector does not generate enough to pay taxation. It pays what you call a rebate. A rebate simply means that the public sector is paying a percentage back to the government for what government initially gave them in the first place. So in order for people who work in the public sector to get their wages, they have to get it from the taxpayer of the private sector. And if it doesn't come from the taxpayer of the private sector, it comes from increasing the printing, borrowing and spending. You most certainly cannot go on an endless road of that printing, borrowing and spending, as it eventually leads to the very problem of hyperinflation, as we saw from the likes of Zimbabwe, as we saw from the likes of Chile in the early 1970s under Communist Allende. It is unsustainable. You could not finance an economy off the back of the printing press. And that was the reason why between 1945 to 1979, before Margaret Thatcher stepped in as Prime Minister and leading up to the winter of discontent in 1978, Britain was facing a serious inflationary problem. Now, a large part of that came down to the fact that there was a massive big bloated public sector. and a tiny small private sector. The private sector could not afford to finance the massive big bloated public sector, so there wasn't enough of the taxpayers' money to finance it. So they had to get money from elsewhere, and that had to come from the printing press. And that led to the devaluation of the currency, and the more that you print in circulation of the paper, the more of that paper there is to go around in circulation, the lower the purchasing power of the currency, the less you can buy with it. That is what results in the higher costs of goods and services. So if you've not got money from a taxpayer, from a private sector to finance your economy, where are you going to get it from? Well, you've got no choice but to run the printing press. And by running the printing press, you drive into that very issue with the inflation. He would more than love to have a massive big bloated public sector and a big welfare state and all the strong social security to continue on paying for all of this stuff and to have all the free goodies, etc, etc. Where else would he get it from? He would have to greatly increase the tax rates, especially on businesses. What people don't seem to comprehend, businesses are made up of human beings, and human beings are not robots that zip up the back, that have a wee button in the back of them to press to force them to do such and such a thing. Not unless you're going to build the Berlin Wall, something similar to that effect. Socialists forget the fact that human beings have their own mind, they have legs to run with, and they have bags to pack. They're not going to stick around to pay for the high tax rates. They wouldn't do it. They will do one of two things. One, they will either find loopholes in order to avoid paying the taxation, like what happened in the United States of America in the 1950s, to avoid paying the taxation, or they will simply up sticks and leave. It's that simple. And as a result of driving businesses out of the country and driving the creditors, the very people who hold the purse strings, you're driving the investment out of your country. Not only will you see the mass unemployment drive up as a result of that, you will see a lack of money. The poor are left without jobs, they're left in poverty, and of course the cost of living has driven up. There would be a lower level of productivity because it all comes down to the laws of supply and demand. The laws of supply and demand states that the less that you produce in quantity, the higher the cost of your goods and services. Socialists are control freaks. They want to control everything. They do not like the thought and idea of the market regulating itself. They despise the thought of freedom. They have this idea that it's the free market that leads to all of these massive problems, etc. So they're in this belief that it's government regulation that protects them, when rather that's the opposite of the truth. But this is what they believe. And so what they think the answer is to solving the problem, they think it's all about, control. When you have someone like Jeremy Corbyn, it's inevitable the government is going to enact all the government price controls. And one of those that you can see coming a mile off, because this is what socialists do, and they never learn from their lesson. Never do. And even when the results turn out god awful, they point the finger and blame it on elsewhere. They never take responsibility for their own actions. When you see a high price in the marketplace, that price is not there as if it's high because of anything to do with ripping people off. That's not the reason why you have a high cost of housing. What socialists will try to do, such as Jeremy Corbyn, he would try to artificially lower that cost. When you try to artificially lower the cost, the underlying reality of scarcity goes nowhere. The high price is telling you there's a shortage. And if you artificially lower the cost, the shortage is still there. It didn't go anywhere. You didn't get rid of the shortage problem. However, when you artificially lower the price, consumer demand drives up. So ask yourself, when consumer demand drives up in an area of a shortage, the cost further spirals out of control. Labour Party say that they're for the working class. How can you be for the working class when you drive people into unemployment? How can you be for the working class people if you wish to drive their face into the dirt by driving inflation through the roof. That's essentially what you would do by raising the tax rates. Raising taxation does not lead to a higher level of productivity. What makes you believe that taking more money out of people's pockets leads to a higher level of productivity? You need money to pay to basically produce. If you're taking more money out of their pockets, they've got less money in their pockets to produce. So if they've got less money in their pockets to produce, how can they produce more? That's what leads to higher costs of goods and services, as well as the devaluation of the purchasing power. Now, every time you point out the fault of the Labour Party and that of Jeremy Corbyn, what do the sympathisers do? They turn their attention to that of the Conservatives. Well, I'm sorry, because I am not a supporter of the front bench Conservatives, because they are no better than that of the Labour Party. I would like to see your own personal opinion on the issue over the argument on Jeremy Corbyn. No doubt if you've got anything you would like to add, if there's anything that I may have missed out, please comment in the comment section below. Be sure to like the video, share the video, favourite the video, and of course thank you for watching my video, and I shall talk to you later. Cheers.